So, the very first verse that Krishna talks about Karma Yoga in all of Gita is the most famous verse. It says, Karmanyeva adhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana ma karma pala heturbhur ma te sangostu akarmani. The translation is, you have the right only to work and not to the fruits thereof. Don't work for the sake of the fruits of work, and yet don't be tempted to withdraw from work. There is a very beautiful instruction here. Many know this verse, and yet the radical nature of this verse and how it is liberating, because that forms the foundation of Karma Yoga, which is the foundation of both jnana and bhakti. So when we are engaging in actions, Krishna says you have the right to action. In fact, you have the duty to action, but you don't have the right over the fruits. So the first thing to recognize is we cannot remain without acting. And that is the first thing, because there is a temptation. So Krishna uses exactly that word, don't be tempted to withdraw from work. So we find this world as suffering, and many philosophers have also talked about it both in the East and the West. There are many Buddhist philosophy, no, perhaps not Buddha himself, but many Buddhist philosophy, and even there is many that has affected many Vedantic philosophers. And similarly, in the West, we have many philosophers like Schopenhauer and so on, who have emphasized the fact that world is suffering, everything is of the nature of impermanence, and therefore it causes a nihilistic outlook towards life. We think, what is the point of all this all? Why should I even bother? I should just retreat from work and simply abide in pure being. It seems very tempting. That's why Krishna uses the word. Don't be tempted to do that, because the nature of the universe is twofold. One is the beingness, and the other is the becomingness. So, in traditional terms, we have this beautiful simile of, that's why, Shiva and Shakti. So, Shiva represents beingness, and Shakti represents becomingness. And both of these are essential for life. Of course, becomingness is coming and going. So, even in our own life, every day, the becomingness subsides when we go to deep sleep. So, we get up in the morning, and then the movement of action starts, and it goes on through the day. And in the night, when we go to sleep, there is a dissolution where we withdraw into our own being. Similarly, of course, the whole cycle of life itself, birth to death, is the same cycle. We are born, then for a few years, 70, 80, 100, it doesn't matter, years, people live, and then at the end there is dissolution. Same at the cosmic level. So it is true that the beingness is ever present, the becomingness comes and goes. And yet, the very purpose of this manifest universe is that process of becoming, is that process of doing things. So that's why Krishna says it is not the fruit of the work that is important, but it is the work itself. So he says, Karmani eva adhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana. So if we focus on the fruit, then it will lead to nihilism. Because no matter the greatest work we do, it's going to go to dust. The greatest empires have gone to dust. The greatest civilizations have gone to dust. So in face of all of that, we may say, what's the point of doing any work at all? Because everything is pointless. But in that nihilism, we will find that we are only going into ignorance, which is called tamas. and not into jnana. So there are many who prematurely take to meditation or who overemphasize on meditation and thereby go into an ignorant, lazy state rather than pure realization. And that is what Krishna is warning Arjuna against. Don't do that, because if you do that, you are not ripe and you will only go into a false sense of withdrawal, which will lead to nihilism and which will lead to laziness and so on. So that's why he says, don't be attached to inaction, and also don't be driven by the cause of work, the fruit of work. He says, Ma karma phala hetu. Your work ought not to be motivated by a particular result in the future, but your work ought to be done for the love of work itself, because it is the nature of energy to expand, it is the nature of energy to express itself. So when we are engaging in play, or when we are engaging in any form of activity, music, or when we are engaging in writing or speaking, if we focus on what is the result of it and thereby drive our motivation out of that, then we will always be in the realm of contraction, because our work is not free. We are always thinking of what will happen, how will it be perceived, what effect will it have, and grandiose people will think of what is the legacy of it and all the rest. And none of that matters, because everything is just moving constantly. So, on the other hand, if we just focus only on the work, the process of working, rather than the result of the work, then we are engaged in full energy with all the faculties for what is meant to be our dharma. And the beauty of this is what Krishna says is this attitude of work results in natural realization. If we chase realization, oftentimes we end up neither here nor there. So in the next verse, Krishna says, therefore, yogastha kuru karmani sangam tyaktva dhananjaya siddhya asadhyo samo bhutva samatvam yoga uchyate. So give up attachment to result, again he emphasizes, and treat success or failure even-mindedly, and that even-mindedness or that equanimity is yoga. Therefore he says yogam samatva uchyate. So if you understand this, then in the third chapter, which is the entire topic is karma yoga, there Krishna proceeds further to describe this. And here he says, if we start from the verse 4th, so Arjuna asks, in fact, the same confusion that many have, Arjuna gives voice to that confusion. He says, you spoke about self-knowledge, then you also spoke about karma. I'm confused now, what is better? He says, Vyamishrena eva vakyena buddhim mohayasi eva me. He says, you have confused me, he says. Arjuna says, you first said self-knowledge. You spoke about the self alone is true. Pure consciousness is the only reality and nothing else matters. But at the same time, you also say that you have to work. So you've confused me, please clarify. So Krishna then responds by saying, yes, there are two ways I have given. One is called jnana and the other is called jnana yoga and karma yoga. And both of them are underlined by bhakti, by the way, because bhakti means love, which underlies both jnana and karma yoga. But then Krishna says, in the 4th verse of the 3rd chapter, he says, man does not achieve freedom by abstaining from them. None attains perfection through mere renunciation of work. It's a very important point that is again lost on many, because Krishna's teaching, Bhagavad Gita's teaching, is both affirming the value of becoming and the underlying sense of being. So that is why it's holistic, because if we focus only on being, then the becoming, which is the natural expression of life itself, is somehow stopped. And there is self mortification, and this has gone to various extremes. Some people, in all traditions, Christian tradition also it is there, Buddhist tradition it's there, and even Vedantic tradition it's there. People deny everything, go into self mortification and all kinds of extreme. And that Krishna very clearly says is not the way. You cannot attain he says, none attains perfection through renunciation. He says, nacha sanyasanadeva siddhim sama adhigachati. Sannyasa is in fact the same root, the word sanyasanat. Sanyasanat means by prematurely renouncing work, one cannot attain realization. Then he goes on to say, not even for a moment can one remain without working. Nahi kaschit kshanamapi jatu tishtati akarmakrit. It's a very direct teaching which is often ignored when we are focusing on only the aspects of self knowledge, because Krishna points out that self knowledge is realized through work and not by abstaining from work. And so he says, first, not even a moment, nahi kashchit kshanamapi. Kshanam means a second, not even a second can one remain without working, because karyate hi vashah karma sarva prakriti jair gunaihi. Prakriti, the mode of nature, which is another word for Shakti. Shakti's job is to make everything work. So every tree is blooming, grass is growing, the animals are moving around, birds are chirping. All of nature is always in movement, in action. And that is the truth of our being also. All humans are engaged in action of various kinds. So Krishna says that's why everyone is made to work by Prakriti, by the Shakti. And therefore he says, if one controls the organs of action, but his mind dwells on their objects, he is a hypocrite. It's a very, these words are all very powerful and strong. Krishna says, Mithyachara. Mithyachara means one who is a hypocrite. Karmendriyani sanyamya yaste manasasmaran indriyarthan vimudhatma mithyacharasa uchyate. He says, if one controls the organs of action, but his mind is dwelling on those objects, then he is a mithyachari, he is a hypocrite. So this is why Krishna tells Arjuna, you go and fight. And that fight that Arjuna has to fight is the same that all of us are engaged in our own way in the battle of life. So far from escaping life, from simply running away from life, which is the instinct of the one who sees life as suffering, Krishna says, yes, life has suffering. He says later, Dukkhalayam Ashashvatam, the life, this world is temporary, impermanent, and of the nature of suffering. And yet it doesn't mean you have to escape from action. In fact, if you escape from it, it will only increase your suffering. You have to take on suffering. Despite the suffering, you have to act with full force, full energy, without any attachment to the result. And when you do that, that is karma yoga, and that purifies your mind. Your mind otherwise is going to have so many vasanas. That's why Arjuna says later, the mind is like this boat that is being tossed around by wind and waters. It doesn't remain still. Many face this problem where we cannot sit still in meditation. In fact, those who have never come to this, they think people are doing nothing sitting still, but when they realize that sitting still is so hard is when they realize how much more hard work it is to sit still. And the reason sitting still is so hard is because the mind is of the nature of constantly moving. And that nature of the mind that moves constantly is because of all the various propensities of Prakriti. As Krishna said in the previous verse, Prakriti makes you move. He says, not a second, kshanam can one remain without working. So if that's the case, then the way out of this is not by either getting drawn in a million directions of the mind, which is only going to lead us astray, but nor by artificially shutting down all action. As he says, if you do that, you are a hypocrite. Instead, engage in what's your duty, and every moment be focused on using the time to engage in your duty without any attachment to result. And if we do that, he says, then automatically the peace of being is realized. He says that's why do the prescribed work, because work is superior to inaction. Indeed, even life in the body is impossible without working. He says, Niyatam kuru karmatvam karma jyayo hi akarmanaha sharira yatra apicha nachena prasidhyati akarmanaha. Sharira yatra means the journey of this body itself cannot sustain without work. So the very breathing is work, digestion is work, eating is work. So there is work involved in every activity of our life. So to say that I will not work or that I'll escape work is hypocrisy. That's why he says, therefore he says, do the prescribed work. Niyatam kuru karma. Don't do random work. Don't engage in others' work. Later he says, therefore, do not get caught in the work of others. Do not poke your nose in things that do not require you, but simply work, focusing on what you ought to do, your prescribed duty, while recognizing that nothing in the end is going to last. So, this is that is why in another verse, in the second chapter, he says, Yoga karmasu kaushalam. He says, this is skill in action and that is real yoga. So this is the walk on razor's edge. Karmasu kaushala means ease in action actually. Kushala means to be very comfortable or easy. So having ease in action comes only in this way. Neither by total inaction, when there is work remaining, to avoid it and to sit in meditation, or to say that all work is illusory, or any such theory one might have, is only going to bottle up that energy within, and that vasana will only come forth in unhealthy ways later. But at the same time, to work with a lot of passion and desiring result and getting upset by not succeeding, and all of that is the other extreme, which causes constant up and down. So Krishna says this kaushalam is to work, doing your prescribed work, recognizing that you can never remain without working, and therefore doing what is necessary despite the challenges, despite the suffering, in fact, welcoming them, because that is what makes work challenging. In a way, if we are playing a game, we want a worthy opponent to play the game with. We don't want to play with a small child. So, in a similar way, any resistance that comes to our work is a worthy opponent that is necessary for us to engage in the game of life. So we work with that focus, doing our prescribed work, what our duty is, and at the same time, not be motivated by the result. Not We may have a goal in mind, that is also fine. When I'm engaging in a particular work, I can have a goal in mind, but that goal is not the main motivator, or achieving that goal is not the main motivator. It's the process of working itself. If the goal is achieved, then it only gives a momentary sense of satisfaction. It doesn't last. We have to focus on the next work. That is how life goes. So, in a way, it is not achievement that matters, but it's achieving that matters. We have to keep doing something which is necessary to do to engage our senses and our organs of action in the right way. And when we do that, the mind is purified, the mind is clear. We are not looking for comfort. We are not drawn to escapist entertainment. We are not caught in inertia and all the rest. and we are able to just focus on our work when it's necessary. And then, when there is nothing to be done, there can be a natural resting in the peace of being. So, the rest in the peace of being comes automatically, just as sleep comes automatically in the night for one who has worked hard. Similarly, even during the day, we can always rest in this beingness if we are always engaging in the becoming when it's necessary. If we shun it out and if we chase this beingness, then it eludes us just as sleep eludes the one who tries to sleep. So, that is the inner secret of Karma Yoga, which is a very powerful teaching which is often ignored because we like the abstraction of learning about jnana and the nature of consciousness. All of that is great, but that's only theory. True philosophy is that which makes our life flower in the right way, change in the right way, and not just abstract understanding and so on. So that's why Krishna gives a very practical way of you engage in this karma yoga, Arjuna, and in this way you realize what I said in the beginning. So Krishna began second chapter by laying out jnana. He said, Na sato vidyate bhavo, na bhavo vidyate satah. The truth never goes out of existence, and that which comes and goes is not true. That one statement summarizes all of jnana, and therefore everything that comes and goes is not true, ultimately speaking. And the truth that is always being never comes and goes, it's ever present. And he described it in the beginning. And then he shifted emphasis to Karma Yoga and said, this is the way for you to realize that. If you go directly to that through inaction, as Krishna said in the verse we saw, nobody realizes perfection through inaction. He said, Nacha sanyasanadeva siddhim sama adhigachati. Through premature sannyasa, or which is to say to renounce work without clearing this field, one cannot realize the truth. So, and he comes to this theme again and again in Gita, even in the 6th chapter later. I think the very first verse of 6th chapter, again Krishna says, Anashraya karma palam karyam karma karotiyah. So he says the one who works without any attachment to the result but works, he is the one who is a true yogi or true jnani. Yeah, he says Anashrita karma palam karyam karma karotiyah. Sa sannyasi sa yogi chana niragnir nacha akriyah. So the true sannyasi, the true yogi is one, he says, who renounces results to action and works with this, whatever is prescribed to be done, he works, and at the same time unattached to the result, but ever focused on the work itself. Not the one who is niragnir nacha akriyaha. He says the one who, niragni means one who doesn't light the fire. So traditionally it is said that sannyasis are not supposed to light fire. So Krishna actually repudiates that and says, the one who prematurely stops lighting the fire, akriyaha, the one who doesn't do work, he is not a sannyasi or a yogi. The real sannyasi, the real yogi is one who works without any attachment to results, and at the same time never shirking from his duty and doing it with no attachment to inaction either. So that's the essence of Karma Yoga, which is the foundation of how we live life so that jnana flowers. Jnana is something that is always present, as Krishna has said in Gita. As we know, consciousness is ever present, and therefore it is not to be realized but to only be recognized. And that recognition comes only when the mind is clear, and the mind is clear only when the field of action is clear. So that is why Karma Yoga is what is emphasized by Krishna again and again, and that results in jnana and bhakti. Bhakti is just this love that comes forth when we recognize that all that acts is As already pointed out in Karma Yoga, all activity is done by Prakriti. Therefore, there is only consciousness and the energy of consciousness, or in different terms, as we said, Shiva and Shakti. So there is no individual, but there is only Shakti. So everyone is expressing their Shakti in their way, and therefore that puts us in the mood of bhakti too, because we see only Him in everyone and everything. We don't see any separation, and then there is naturally love and compassion in also pointing to others. The highest love and compassion is, of course, pointing this, that you can actually actualize the potential of being a human in this way. And that is the whole purpose of self knowledge. And that is why bhakti is the undercurrent of both jnana and bhakti, jnana and karma yoga. This notion of karma yoga is so abused in many places. So people say that if you go to many ashrams and stuff, they'll say, oh, in the afternoon I'm going to do karma yoga, because they are going to do some seva in the ashram. And that is a very wrong usage of the term, because karma yoga is not what you do, but it's how you do. Karma yoga is that runs through life. It's not something that one just engages in for a particular type of action and then leaves it and does something else, jnana yoga some other time, bhakti yoga some other time. This kind of compartmentalization is the antithesis of what is considered as true karma yoga itself.